Hey everyone, welcome back to yet another marvelous video. This one is for all the Star Trek fans out there. Star Trek has given us some incredible space battles over the years, but they were never just about the fights or how good the whole thing looks. Each of these battles happened for a reason, and every one of them left lasting consequences. In this video, we're going to be looking at 10 great battles we've seen in the history of this universe. So sit back and enjoy as we dive in. Battle of Wolf 359. The story is set in the 24th century, and it follows the crew of the Enterprise D as they respond to a distress call from the Federation colony on Jarrett 4, only to arrive and find nothing there at all. The entire colony is just gone, and the Federation believes that this was the work of the Borg. For those of you new to Star Trek, the Borg are basically cyborgs and they have a hive mind. Starfleet takes this seriously right away, because this kind of destruction is not new. They've seen it before, years earlier, along the Romulan neutral zone, and later in System J25, where entire outposts vanished without explanation. Back then, they did not know who was responsible. Now they do. Admiral J.P. Hansen comes aboard the Enterprise along with Lieutenant Commander Elizabeth Shelby, a tactical specialist who has been studying the Borg. Starfleet orders a fleet-wide alert and starts warning every Federation and Allied outpost that something bad is coming. And then they get confirmation. A Federation ship reports contact with a massive cube-shaped object, gets out just enough to say they have engaged the Borg, and then the signal cuts off completely. They hear nothing back after that. With reinforcements still days away, the Enterprise heads to the last known position of the lost Starfleet vessel and comes face to face with the Borg cube itself. The Borg have one simple demand. They want Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Picard refuses, and the Borgs start attacking. It becomes very clear soon that the Enterprise cannot win easily, so they run, ducking into the Bassen Nebula, hoping the interference will give them some kind of advantage. But this doesn't really work because the Borg force the Enterprise back out, board the ship, and in the middle of the chaos, Picard is taken. The cube immediately jumps to high warp and heads straight for Earth, while Riker, now acting captain, orders pursuit. At this point, the situation is already dire, but it somehow gets worse, because when an away team boards the Borg cube to try and slow it down, they discover what has happened to Picard. He's not just been captured, he's been assimilated, turned into a Borg drone, and given a name, Locutus of Borg. That is where the first part ends, with Picard speaking for the Borg, calmly informing Starfleet that resistance is futile, and Riker ordering the Enterprise to fire anyway. What happens next is one of the darkest moments in Star Trek The Next Generation, and honestly the entire franchise. A single Borg cube reaches Wolf 359 and goes up against a full Starfleet task force. The cube tears through the fleet almost effortlessly. 39 Starfleet ships are destroyed in a matter of hours, and more than 11,000 personnel are killed. The Starfleet is not prepared for any of this. The Enterprise arrives too late to help. All that's left at Wolf 359 is wreckage. Ships like the Melbourne are gone. They have been reduced to debris, and the loss is huge. For Picard, the impact is deeply personal. He survives, but he carries the weight of knowing his knowledge was used to destroy an entire fleet. The guilt does not go away, and the trauma of being turned into Locutus stays with him long after the Borg cube is destroyed. For Starfleet as a whole, Wolf 359 becomes a lesson. After this, ship design changes, and they get better with their defenses. Exploration still remains their mission, but now they're better prepared for something like this. And the effects of this battle do not go away just like that. Years later, in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Benjamin Sisko is introduced as a man who was at Wolf 359, who lost his wife there, and who still carries resentment toward Picard because of it. So, even though the Federation survived the encounter, it was clear that things could not just go back to normal, and Starfleet began rebuilding its fleet with a new mindset, a shift that eventually produced the Defiant class. Battle of Sector 001, Earth. I was a little disappointed when Star Trek First Contact came out because the early trailers made it look like we were getting a Borg war movie with a lot of battles. But when you actually watch the film, the Battle of Sector 001, the thing everything seemed to be building up toward, barely lasts 3 minutes on screen. If you stop thinking about it as just what we see on camera, the Battle of Sector 001 is easily one of the most epic conflicts. We just don't get to watch most of it. There's no proper timeline given in the canon. We see the Starfleet engaging the Borg cube out in the Typhon expanse, and the Enterprise only finally catches up once the battle's already reached the Sol system. And by the time we join the fight, you can feel how bad things are. Ships are burning, hulls are breaking apart, and suddenly you're seeing brand new warship classes fighting alongside the Enterprise in what looks like a last stand. At that point, this was Star Trek's biggest visual effects budget ever. They try to do a lot of justice to the fans' imaginations. Because Sector 001 is not just a cool action sequence, it's a direct sequel to Wolf 359. This is the rematch Starfleet has been preparing for ever since a single Borg cube wiped out an entire fleet. This time the Borg do not stop, they actually reach Earth. The fleet engages them long before the Enterprise arrives, and once again, even with all that preparation, Starfleet still can't stop one cube on its own. Picard is deliberately kept out of the fight because Starfleet is still terrified of what he represents after Wolf 359. And honestly, it's understandable. It would be hard to just ignore his time as Locutus. But the irony here is that when Picard finally does break his orders and enter the battle, it's his connection to the Borg that ends up saving Earth. And even then, it didn't fully get over. The cube's destruction is only half the plan. The Borg immediately jumps to time travel, trying to rewrite First Contact itself. The crew of the Enterprise E ends up taking a detour through time, where they stop the Borg Queen from wiping out the Federation before it even has a chance to exist. Picard gets some closure here for the first time since Wolf 359. Some of the Borg wreckage left behind in the 21st century eventually reactivates nearly 100 years later, and while Jonathan Archer's Enterprise does manage to destroy the ship the Borg had assimilated, the damage is already done. Before they're stopped, the drones send a signal back toward the Delta Quadrant, and there's a strong implication that this may have been the very first message that alerted the Borg Collective to Earth's existence in the first place. Battle of the Binary Stars. Okay, up next we have the Battle of the Binary Stars, and I think this one exists to remind us that the Klingons was never guaranteed. You realize just how fragile the peace with the Klingons always was. This is the first real engagement between the Federation and the Klingon Empire in over a century. For generations, Starfleet has operated as if open war with the Klingons is a thing of the past, something history already resolved. T'Kuvma does not share that belief, so he disables a relay on the edge of Federation space. He's not trying to start a war outright. He wants to make sure that Starfleet shows up on his terms. And when the USS Shinju arrives to investigate, it does so cautiously, treating the situation as a problem to be assessed, not a battle. Michael Burnham's encounter with a Klingon warrior escalates the whole thing fast, and the Shinju's distress call brings Starfleet ships pouring in, one after another, responding to what they believe is a developing crisis. At the same time, T'Kuvma activates the Beacon of Kahless, calling the Great Houses to unite, and suddenly this is not a border incident anymore. For a brief moment, both fleets face each other in silence. When the shooting starts, it starts fast, and it doesn't stop. Starfleet loses ships almost immediately. Any hope that this can be contained dies the moment Europa is destroyed. By the time things have settled, thousands of people are dead, and whatever was supposed to be at the beginning does not really matter anymore. T'Kuvma does not live to see the war he wanted, but he doesn't need to. The Klingon houses leave unified, bound together by shared bloodshed, while Starfleet is left trying to understand how an investigation turned into this. The fallout from that battle eventually leads to Vok being remade as Ash Tyler. His relationship with Michael Burnham ends up becoming an important thing in ending the war. Burnham, meanwhile, doesn't walk away from the Binary Stars at all. The loss of Captain Georgiou hits her hard enough that when the time comes, she barely fights her own court-martial. She accepts a life sentence with almost no resistance, carrying the weight of that first battle as punishment she clearly believes she deserves. The Battle of Deep Space Nine, Operation Return. Alright, so let's talk about the Battle of Deep Space Nine, also known as Operation Return, because by this point in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the Dominion has done something unthinkable. they've occupied Deep Space Nine itself. The station is no longer a neutral outpost or a meeting point, it's an enemy stronghold sitting right on top of the Bajoran wormhole. That matters because the wormhole is the only direct route from the Gamma Quadrant, and as long as the Dominion controls it, they can keep sending ships and troops through faster than the Alpha Quadrant can replace its losses. The Federation, along with the Klingons and Romulans, knows this cannot be allowed. So they move to take the situation back outright. That operation becomes known as Operation Return. A huge part of this comes down to the minefield across the wormhole. Those self-replicating mines are the only thing stopping endless Dominion reinforcements, which is why the station was abandoned so the minefield could be deployed, allowing the Dominion to take it uncontested. If the minefield goes down when the Dominion is still holding Deep Space Nine, the war is over right there. Everyone involved understands this, and here's the thing. The worst case scenario actually does happen. A massive Dominion reinforcement fleet starts emerging from the wormhole, exactly what everyone feared. At that point, the battle should already be over. There's no fleet left in the Alpha Quadrant that can stop that many ships. The math doesn't work. Sisko does not win this battle with ships. He wins it as the emissary. He asks the prophets to intervene, and they do. They remove the reinforcements. The entire Dominion reinforcement fleet simply disappears. Operation Return would not have succeeded otherwise. Without that intervention, retaking the station would not matter, because the Alpha Quadrant still loses the war. What follows is, at that point, the largest sustained space battle Star Trek had ever put on television. Starfleet takes heavy losses early and continues taking them, because pulling back is no longer an option. Sisko's not just making tactical decisions in this moment. He's carrying the weight of being the emissary the entire time. The prophets intervene, and Sisko gets what he asks for and has to live with the cost of it. Starfleet is not alone anymore. Everything reaches its breaking point during Sacrifice of Angels. As the fighting gets more intense, Klingon and Romulan fleets enter the battle with the Federation ships. This is not because they suddenly trust each other now out of nowhere, but the alternative here is letting the Dominion win by default, and they obviously don't want that. Their old rivalries don't vanish, they're just put aside long enough so that they can survive what comes next. The station is finally retaken. For the first time since the war began, the Dominion is forced to respond instead of dictating events. A great deal of destruction has already occurred. Nothing about the aftermath feels like a victory. The war's not over. Deep Space Nine is back in Federation hands, but the cost of holding it has permanently changed how this war is going to be fought. The Second Battle of Chintoka. So next up is the Second Battle of Chintoka, and by this point in the Dominion War, it really feels like Starfleet believes it's finally learned how to fight this conflict. This happens much later in the war, when things genuinely seem to be turning in the Alliance's favor. All of this is playing out in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, after the Federation, Klingons, and Romulans have pushed deep into Cardassian space. Cardassia is fully part of the Dominion by this point, and Chintoka is one of those systems that feels like a real win. It's held by the Alliance, and it feels stable. And that's exactly when the Dominion hits back. The Breen enter the war openly, and they bring an energy-dampening weapon that Starfleet has never encountered before. One hit and the ships simply shut down. The battle itself is over almost as soon as it begins. Hundreds of Allied ships engage the Dominion and Breen forces, and nearly all of them are destroyed. Federation ships, Romulan warbirds, Klingon vessels, all dropping out of the fight one after another. The Klingons are the least affected at first, but even they can't turn the tide. For the next month, there are no advances, no pushes into Dominion space, because there's nothing left to push with. Engineers across the Federation and Romulan fleets are scrambling just to understand what happened, let alone how to counter it. Eventually, they discovered that a single Klingon ship survived the Breen weapon thanks to a chance modification made by its chief engineer. Once that's identified, the Klingons roll the same modification out across their entire fleet. Overnight, they become the only Allied force that can still fight effectively. That leaves the Federation and Romulans in an impossible position. Their ships are still vulnerable, so they're pulled back from the front lines entirely. For a time, the war is being held together almost solely by the Klingon Empire. And then comes the moment no one was prepared for. The USS Defiant, a ship that is designed specifically to fight enemies like the Dominion, takes a direct hit from the Breen weapon. The systems fail almost instantly. Seconds later, it's destroyed permanently. For context, Wolf 359 costs Starfleet around 40 ships. Chintoka costs them hundreds of ships. Any sense that the Alliance is learning faster than the Dominion goes away in just one afternoon. This battle makes something painfully clear. The Dominion adapts faster than Starfleet ever does. Every time the Alliance thinks it has the upper hand, the Dominion arrives with something new. Almost immediately after Chintoka, the Cardassian Liberation Front begins its rebellion, forcing the Dominion to divert ships and resources away from the front. That delay gives the Alliance time to recover, capture a Jem'Hadar fighter, and finally develop a counter to the Breen weapon. That is the only reason this defeat does not end in war. So when people call the Second Battle of Chintoka one of the worst defeats the Alliance ever suffered, that is not an exaggeration. In terms of sheer loss, it's arguably the lowest point of the entire Dominion War and the worst disaster Starfleet has faced. Battle of the Mutara Nebula. The Battle of the Mutara Nebula happens in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and it is essentially the point where everything between Kirk and Khan finally comes to a head. At this stage, Khan has taken control of the USS Reliant and is hunting Kirk for his personal revenge. The Enterprise has already been badly damaged in an earlier encounter, and in a straight fight, it doesn't have the advantage. Kirk knows this, which is why he deliberately draws Khan into the Mutara Nebula. The nebula itself is extremely unstable. It messes with sensors so badly that shields and long-range targeting basically stop being an option. Inside it, neither ship can see the other clearly, and most of the technological advantages both sides normally rely on are effectively gone. Kirk is trying to level the playing field. Once both ships are inside the nebula, the battle changes completely. Instead of fighting each other from a distance, the Enterprise and the Reliant are forced into close-range fights, relying on visual contact and manual calculations. This is where Kirk gets the upper hand. He understands three-dimensional combat in a way that Khan just doesn't. Khan is pretty smart, but his experience is not the same as Kirk's, and he struggles to adapt to fighting in an environment where ships can just approach from above or below, not just head-on. Using that advantage, Kirk maneuvers the Enterprise into a position where it can strike the Reliant directly. The Enterprise causes a lot of damage, destroying one of the Reliant's warp nacelles and leaving the ship crippled. At that point, we basically know the outcome. But Khan refuses to accept defeat, and he activates the Genesis device, a highly unstable piece of technology capable of reorganizing matter on a planetary scale. He's not trying to escape. He wants to destroy the Enterprise along with himself. This is about revenge for him. The Enterprise cannot go to warp in time because its warp drive is damaged, and this is where Spock intervenes. He enters a radiation-flooded engineering compartment to repair the engines, fully aware that it'll kill him. His actions allow the Enterprise to escape the nebula moments before Genesis detonates. They win this battle not because of all the resources they had, but because of Kirk's experience and Spock's willingness to sacrifice his own life to get them to safety. The Khitomer conspiracy. Next up, I want to talk about Khitomer. Before we go any further, this is not the Khitomer massacre. This is not the Romulan betrayal, not Worf's childhood trauma, not the 2346 disaster. This is the other Khitomer event, the one that happens almost a century earlier during Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. By this point, the Federation and the Klingon Empire have spent decades locked in a Cold War. There's no full-scale fighting, just constant tension and suspicion. When Praxis explodes, the Klingon economy collapses, and suddenly the Empire cannot keep playing that game. Peace talks are arranged, and Khitomer is chosen as the place where all of this is supposed to finally end. And then someone tries to blow it all up. Chancellor Gorkin, the Klingon leader, pushing hardest for peace, is assassinated when his ship is attacked by a Klingon bird of prey that can fire while it's cloaked, which is something that should be impossible. It looks like a betrayal from inside the Empire, and it gives hardliners on both sides exactly what they need to push for war. Kirk and McCoy are framed for the murder, thrown into a Klingon prison, and suddenly the peace process is basically hanging by a thread. What's really happening, though, is a conspiracy. Klingon and Federation extremists are working together to sabotage peace, because for them, peace is the real threat. The same cloaked bird of prey attacks again, this time during the peace conference itself, aiming to wipe out the delegates and making war unavoidable. The Enterprise figures out how to track the ship by its exhaust gases, exposes it just long enough, and destroys it. Once that ship is gone, the assassination plot does not work, and the truth finally comes out. And because of that, the peace talks continue. The Khitomer Accords are signed. Decades of Cold War hostility between the Federation and the Klingon Empire end. The Battle of Bassen Rift. Romulan War Skirmishes. So the battle in the Bassen Rift happens in Star Trek Nemesis, and it's easy to miss how important it is because it isn't a massive one. It matters because it shows how fundamentally Starfleet and the Federation think about war at this point. In 2379, the USS Enterprise E is on a mission when a Romulan political upheaval turns into a very dangerous situation. A clone of Captain Picard named Shinzon has taken over the Romulan government, and he has a warship called the Scimitar, a Riemann warbird built for one purpose: death. Shinzon hates the Federation, and specifically Picard, and he's got this massive weapon on board capable of destroying life. It's called a Thalaron radiation weapon. It wipes out all organic life instantly and leaves everything else intact. The Enterprise gets lured into the Bassen Rift, which is a region of space between Romulus and the neutral zone that interferes with communications. Once you're inside, you can't call for help or coordinate beyond your ship. That's exactly where Shinzon chooses to strike, because he knows you're isolated and vulnerable there. This is one of the few times in Star Trek where you're watching small-scale combat under extremely intense conditions. It's just Picard, his crew, and Scimitar, who fires when cloaked and is basically disabling the Enterprise's warp engines and leaving it stranded. Eventually, Romulan warbirds show up, and surprisingly, not as enemies. They come to help. They even recognize that Shinzon is a threat to everyone. They manage to corner the Scimitar and stop it from destroying the Enterprise together. The Enterprise is left badly damaged, and the battle only ends because Picard boards the Scimitar himself. Shinzon is killed in close combat, but that still is not enough. The Thalaron weapon is moments from firing, and the only way to stop it is for Data to sacrifice himself by transporting the device away from the Enterprise and detonating it in space. This is what actually ends the fight. What makes the Bassen Rift matter is not how many ships were involved, but what it represents. Starfleet is forced to fight where there is no visibility and no communication. The Battle of Cardassia Prime. So the Battle of Cardassia Prime is where the Dominion War actually ends. By this point, the fighting has dragged on for years, and the Dominion still controls Cardassia. Things are falling apart. The Cardassians turn on them. What starts as resistance becomes a full rebellion. Power grids are sabotaged, communications are disrupted, and suddenly, the Dominion is fighting a war on a planet it's supposed to be using as its stronghold. At the same time, the Federation, Klingons, and Romulans are already pushing in from space. The battle above Cardassia Prime is massive and relentless. Ships are being destroyed constantly, and no one is really pulling punches in. For a moment, it looks like the Dominion might still brute force its way through, until the Cardassian fleet breaks ranks and turns on its former allies. The Dominion responds. Cities on Cardassia Prime are bombarded from orbit to punish the population for rebelling. The death toll is staggering. Hundreds of millions of Cardassian civilians are killed in the final days of the war. Even by Dominion standards, it is horrific, and that's when it finally stops. One of the founders, the female changeling, is captured. The Great Link is already dying from the morphogenic virus, a disease engineered by Section 31. The Federation knows this, and they let it happen until the very end. There's nothing left to gain by continuing the fight. It ends because Odo links with the female changeling and cures the Great Link. In return, she orders the Jem'Hadar to stand down, and the Dominion War is finally over. The Alliance wins, but Cardassia is devastated. The Quadra is exhausted, and everyone involved knows there's no real victory here. Battle of the Kelvin Timeline, Earth Defense. Okay guys, the last on our list is the Battle of the Kelvin Timeline Earth Defense, which starts off right at the beginning of the Star Trek reboot films, with an event that literally tears the universe in two. The Narada is not acting alone. It's pulled into the past while pursuing Spock from the Prime timeline, and that failed rescue attempt is what creates the anomaly in the first place. It's not a typical fleet battle. It starts with the USS Kelvin, a Federation starship on the edge of normal space, going about its patrol. Out of nowhere, an enormous Romulan ship, later known as the Narada, emerges through a temporal anomaly. This ship is not responding to diplomacy. Its first move is to attack the Kelvin. The Narada firepower is overwhelming, and the Kelvin is outgunned almost instantly. The crew knows they're outmatched, but they buy every second they can. They fire on the Narada, they try to protect the civilian ship they're escorting, and they do everything in their power to slow the warship. They end up sacrificing the Kelvin itself in a final effort to give the civilians a chance to escape. George Kirk takes command of the Kelvin, and he knowingly stays behind to ram the ship into the Narada buying time for everyone else to escape, including his newborn son. While the Kelvin is destroyed, the people on board the civilian ship survive, including a young man who would grow up to be James T. Kirk. But here's the real twist. The Narada is not just another enemy fleet. It's a future ship from a timeline that doesn't exist yet. The Narada appearance triggers a split in the timeline, creating what we now call the Kelvin timeline. Everything that follows in those movies, the new versions of Kirk, Spock, Uhura, and all of them, exist because of that. And the consequences of that split are huge. The Federation still exists, but everything is reshaped by this event. Alliances shift, characters meet earlier or later than they should, and future conflicts play out differently because the timeline is changed. Well, with that, guys, we've come to the end of yet another fun video. Now, I want to hear from you. Which Star Trek battle do you like the most? And more importantly, which battle did we not include that you think absolutely should have made the list? Was there a moment that stuck with you? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and honestly, half the best video ideas come from me. If you enjoyed this one, like, subscribe, and stick around, because there's a lot more Star Trek coming. And until next time, live long and prosper.